The static was a hungry animal, chewing on the edges of every word. On the main tactical display in the Forward Operations Base Olympus, the icons for SEAL Team Ares were clustered together, a tight knot of defiant green surrounded by a rising tide of red. They were trapped. Repeat, extraction bird is down. We are pinned, taking heavy fire from fortified positions in the upper Caldera Ridge. We have 3 wounded, 1 critical. How copy, Olympus? The voice of Ares 1, Lieutenant Commander Thorne, was strained, the words clipped by adrenaline and the shriek of incoming fire in the background. His team had been sent into the Caloris Basin, a geologically unstable hellscape of fractured rock and corrosive volcanic vents, to neutralize a separatist artillery battery that had been shelling the main colony. The mission was a success, but the exfiltration had turned into a slaughter. The enemy, the so-called Free Caloris Militia, wasn't a disorganized rabble. They were professionals, and they had set a perfect trap. Colonel Marcus Vance stood before the holographic map, his face a mask of chiseled granite. A former F-22 pilot with a career built on strategic precision and by-the-book risk assessment, he saw only failure states. The basin was a death trap. Dense plumes of metallic ash and superheated sulfur dioxide choked the narrow canyons, rendering thermal and LiDAR imaging useless. The enemy had seeded the ridges with a network of advanced, radar-guided anti-aircraft cannons. They had shot down a state-of-the-art V-28 Valor tiltrotor like a clay pigeon. "We can't get another bird in there, Thorne." Vance's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man calculating acceptable losses. "The ceiling is 0, the ash cloud is charged. It's a particle storm. No sensor package can penetrate it, and any aircraft flying blind will be torn apart by the automated batteries." A young tactical controller, a lieutenant named Chun, flinched at the finality in the colonel's tone. He looked from the map to the silent figure standing near the edge of the darkened command center. Major Eva Rostova. She hadn't spoken a word, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the flickering red icons swarming the SEAL's position. Her flight suit was a stark, practical gray against the cool blue glow of the holodable. "Sir," Chun began, his voice hesitant. "Hangar 7 has the A-12. Major Rostova has over 3,000 hours in low-altitude, zero-vis environments." Vance didn't even turn. He waved a dismissive hand. "The A-12 Avenger 2 is a ground attack relic, Major. A flying tank. It's too slow, its stealth profile is a joke in this particulate density, and it's a massive target. We send her in there, we lose a pilot and an aircraft. It's tactically unsound." He looked at the comms officer. "Inform Ares team we're exploring ground-based rescue options. Timeline, 12 to 14 hours. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. Ares team didn't have 12 hours. They didn't have 1. The transmission from the ground crackled again, this time weaker, punctuated by a percussive explosion that shook the speaker. "Olympus, they're bringing in mortars. They're bracketing our position. We need air support now. Anything. A show of force, a gun run. Anything you've got." Colonel Vance closed his eyes for a second, a flicker of something almost human crossing his features before it was suppressed. "There is nothing I can do, Lieutenant Commander. Hold your position." The line went silent, filled only by the hiss of empty space. Major Rostova, still unnoticed by Vance, quietly uncrossed her arms. She turned and walked out of the command center without a word, her boots making no sound on the deck plating. Chun watched her go, a knot of dread and a tiny, desperate spark of hope tightening in his chest. The colonel had made his decision based on data and doctrine, but Rostova operated on something else entirely. She was heading for Hangar 7. The declaration from Colonel Vance was not a suggestion. It was a verdict. Sending in an asset is a non-starter. Mission scrubbed. "We move to contingency rescue protocols." The words echoed in the sterile quiet of the Tactical Operations Center, each syllable a nail in the coffin for Ares team. Vance, a man whose entire career was a testament to the infallibility of regulations and predictive modeling, saw the situation in binary terms. Survival probability for any air asset entering the Caloris Basin was calculated at less than 4%. To him, the matter was closed. He turned his attention to the logistics of a ground rescue, a grim and protracted affair involving armored crawlers that would take half a day just to reach the basin's treacherous rim. He was already composing the after-action report in his head, framing the loss of the SEALs as an unavoidable consequence of superior enemy preparation and an impossible environment. It was clean. It was procedural. "Sir, with all due respect," Lieutenant Chun spoke up again, his voice tight. "Major Rostova's flight record." "Her record is irrelevant, Lieutenant." Vance cut him off, his voice edged with ice. He finally turned to face the young officer, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "Her record is full of high-risk, low-percentage maneuvers that border on insubordination. She flies by feel, by instinct. In my Air Force, we operate on data. The data says anyone who enters that basin dies. Is that clear?" "Crystal, sir," Chen said, his gaze dropping to the console. But the seed of doubt had been planted, not in Vance, but in the atmosphere of the room. The other controllers exchanged fleeting glances. They all knew of Major Eva Valkyrie Rostova. She was a legend of the simulator jocks, a ghost story whispered by maintenance crews. A pilot who had flown a crippled A-12 back from the Cygnus blockade with one engine out and her port wing looking like Swiss cheese. A woman who seemed to commune with her aircraft on a level that defied technical manuals. She was also a professional headache, a pilot who saw regulations as mere suggestions when lives were on the line. Unseen by the command staff, Rostova was already in the breezeway leading to the hangars. The air shifted from the recycled, ozone-tinged chill of the TOC to the warmer, oil and ozone scent of the flight line. She didn't storm off in a fury. Her walk was deliberate, a steady, unhurried pace that betrayed no agitation. Anger was a useless emotion, a waste of energy. She was already working the problem. Vance saw the A-12 as a relic. Rostova saw it as a comrade. She knew its every groan, every shudder. She knew the precise G-load at which the left aileron would whine, and the exact throttle percentage that made the Gu-18/B cannon's housing vibrate with a low, hungry hum. The A-12 wasn't a flying tank. It was a beast, and you didn't command a beast by yelling at it. You learned its language. The colonel's dismissal was expected. Men like Vance saw the world on a screen as data points and probability curves. They had forgotten the human element, the intangible factor of a pilot who knew their machine and their mission with absolute primal clarity. He saw an unacceptable risk. She saw a job that needed to be done. He heard the finality of a command. She heard the dying plea of soldiers who had been written off. In his mind, the SEALs were already gone, their icons on the map transitioning from green to a memorialized gray. He had made the logical choice. But Rostova wasn't moving toward the pilot's lounge or the debriefing room. She was moving toward the one place where logic gave way to action, where the cold calculus of command was rendered meaningless by the roar of two massive turbofan engines. She was heading for her jet. The colonel had given his orders, but out on the windy, ash-dusted tarmac, a different authority was about to assert itself. Hangar 7 was a cathedral of gray steel and yellow safety lines, dominated by the hulking form of the A-12 Avenger II. It wasn't sleek or elegant like the orbital interceptors in the adjacent bays. It was brutalist architecture given wings. Squat, powerful, and armored to the teeth, its twin engines were slung high over a straight, broad wing designed for low-speed stability. The entire airframe was built around its primary weapon, a 7-barrel, 40mm rotary cannon, whose muzzle protruded from the nose like the maw of some mythical beast. The jet, tail number 781, was nicknamed Bad Penny. Rostova entered the hangar, and the ground crew, a tight-knit team led by a grizzled master sergeant named Rico, immediately straightened up. No orders were given, but a silent understanding passed between them. They had seen this look in her eyes before. Pre-flight diagnostics now, Rico barked to his team, his voice carrying across the cavernous space. Full combat loadout. Gu-18 gets the PGU-45/B high-explosive incendiary. Wing pylons 2 and 8 get the smoke canisters, 3 and 7 get the fire and forget Mavericks. I want this bird ready to scream in 10 minutes. Rostova walked directly to the cockpit ladder, ignoring the flurry of activity. She ran a gloved hand along the port side of the nose, just below the canopy. The titanium skin there was slightly discolored, a patch of metal that was rougher than the surrounding surface. It was a scar from a proximity-detonated missile over Io, a wound that she and the Bad Penny had shared. It was a reminder. Every flight was a conversation with death. She swung herself up the ladder and settled into the cockpit. It wasn't the sterile, glass and touchscreen interface of a modern fighter. It was a hybrid, a cockpit designed for functionality under extreme duress. There were screens, yes, but they were surrounded by heavy, physical switches and reinforced buttons, controls a pilot could operate by feel even if the canopy was shattered and the cockpit was filled with smoke. She smelled the familiar scent of hydraulic fluid, worn leather, and the faint, sharp tang of electricity. This was her office, her sanctuary. Her fingers danced over the console in a practiced, fluid sequence. Power on. Avionics check. Weapons systems initialized. The cockpit came alive with a low hum, and the heads-up display HUD flickered into existence, painting a transparent green grid against the gray hangar wall. She strapped herself in, pulling the harness tight until it was a part of her, connecting her to the machine. She was no longer just a pilot in a seat. She was the brain, and the A-12 was her body. Rico appeared at the side of the cockpit, his face grim. "Major, we just got the official stand-down order from the tower. Colonel Vance has grounded all combat flights." Rostova didn't look at him. Her eyes were focused on the engine temperature gauges as they began to climb. "Is the aircraft combat ready, Master Sergeant?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Rico hesitated for only a fraction of a second. He had served with a dozen pilots, but none like her. He trusted her instincts more than he trusted any colonel's orders. "She's loaded for bear and ready to bite, Major." "Then unchock the wheels." She pulled her helmet on, the world outside muting to a low thrum. The canopy hissed shut, sealing her inside the armored shell. Through the comms, she heard the tower frantically hailing her, demanding she power down the engines. She ignored it. With a final nod to Rico, she engaged the throttle. The twin engines spooled up from a whine to a deafening roar that shook the very foundation of the hangar. The Bad Penny was awake, and it was hungry. The A-12 taxied onto the runway, a blunt instrument of war against a sky bruised purple and orange by the planet's twilight. The control tower's commands grew more frantic, shifting from orders to threats. Rostova ignored them all. She had already slaved her comms to the SEAL's encrypted channel. There was only one voice she needed to hear. With a final check of her control surfaces, she pushed the throttles to the firewall. The Avenger, heavy with fuel and ordnance, lumbered for a moment before the immense power of its engines took hold, pinning Rostova back in her seat. It accelerated with the ferocity of a charging bull, devouring the runway. Then, with a gentle pull on the stick, she was airborne, a gray specter climbing into the darkening sky. She didn't ascend into the clean, safe altitudes. She did the opposite. As soon as she cleared the base perimeter, she banked hard and dropped, leveling off a mere 50 feet above the cracked, barren plains leading to the Caloris Basin. She was going in under the rug. The ingress was a testament to a kind of flying that wasn't taught in simulators. This was pure stick and rudder skill, augmented by an almost preternatural sense of the aircraft's dimensions. The A-12 was not built for this. It was a brawler, not a dancer. But in her hands, it became impossibly agile. The entrance to the basin was a narrow, jagged canyon, a wound in the planet's crust. As she entered it, the world dissolved into a maelstrom of brown and gray. The metallic ash cloud was worse than predicted. It was a physical presence, a gritty, abrasive fog that screamed against her armored canopy. The sound was like being inside a sandblaster. Her advanced sensor suite immediately flatlined. LiDAR, radar, thermal, all of it was useless, drowned in a sea of particle interference and false returns. The HUD flickered with amber warning icons. Sensor degradation, environmental hazard, autopilot unavailable. She was flying blind. But not entirely. Rostova switched her primary display to the one system that still worked. Raw electro-optical, filtered through a dozen different spectra. It was a ghost image, a washed-out, low-fidelity picture of the world. But it was enough. She flew not by what she could clearly see, but by the subtle shifts in pressure and shadow, by the way the wind shear felt through the flight stick, by the angry roar of the engines as they ingested the corrosive air. The canyon walls, invisible one moment, would leap out of the swirling ash the next. She jinked and rolled, her inputs on the controls not jerky reactions, but smooth, anticipatory adjustments. She wasn't avoiding the terrain. She was flowing with it. The A-12, a machine designed for open skies, became a river flowing through a rocky bed, its wingtips clearing jagged rock formations by mere feet. Inside the cockpit, her breathing was steady, a rhythmic hiss in her oxygen mask. Her heart rate was as calm as a monk's. This was her element. The chaos outside was a symphony, and she was its conductor. The aircraft groaned under the strain, the airframe flexing with each violent maneuver. Alarms shrieked and were silenced. She was pushing the bad penny to its absolute limits, and the old warhorse was responding, holding together through sheer, stubborn will. On the SEAL's comm channel, she heard the rising panic. Mortar round, 50 meters. They're walking it in. We're out of time. Ares 1. Rostova's voice cut through the static, impossibly calm. A sliver of steel in the chaos. Hang on. I'm almost there. She saw a flicker of energy ahead, a muzzle flash. One of the automated AA cannons. It hadn't seen her, but its search radar had brushed against her for a split second, and it fired a speculative burst into the gloom. Tracers of white-hot plasma ripped through the air in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat wash over the canopy. She didn't flinch. She was no longer just flying into the storm. She was now part of it. On the ground, what was left of SEAL Team Ares was making its final stand. They had taken cover in the ruins of an old ore processing plant, a skeleton of rusted girders and shattered ferrocrete. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, Ares 1, was pressed against a crumbling wall, firing his rifle in controlled bursts. His leg throbbed from a piece of shrapnel, and his ammo was down to his last 2 magazines. The moans of his critically wounded corpsmen were a constant, grim reminder of how badly this had gone. The Free Caloris militia were closing in, moving with disciplined confidence. A heavy machine gun emplacement on a ridge 300 meters away was their biggest problem. It had them completely suppressed, its rhythmic hammering chewing up their cover, spitting concrete dust and metal splinters into the air. Every time they tried to move, a hail of fire forced them back down. It was the anchor of the enemy's assault. Olympus has written us off. His comms tech spat, huddled beside him. 14 hours for a ground team? It's a death sentence. Thorne didn't reply. He just chambered another round. He had led his men into this trap. He would be the last one to die. The mortar rounds were getting closer, the earth shaking with each impact. It was over. Then, through the cacophony of battle and the howl of the ashen wind, came a new sound. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a fighter jet. It was deeper, guttural, a furious roar that seemed to make the very air vibrate. It was the sound of a predator. A shadow, immense and swift, blotted out the dim, dust-filtered light for a fraction of a second. It was so low, so fast, that Thorne barely registered its shape. Then the world exploded. A stream of 40mm cannon shells, each the size of a milk bottle, slammed into the machine gun nest. The sound wasn't the BRRRT of a smaller Gatling gun. It was a series of catastrophic, overlapping booms, thump, 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 that tore the ridge apart. The emplacement, the crew, and a 10-meter section of the rock face simply vanished in a roiling cloud of fire, smoke, and pulverized stone. The oppressive hammering of the enemy machine gun was replaced by a sudden, shocking silence. The SEALs stared, dumbfounded, at the smoking crater where their biggest problem had been moments before. A voice, calm and clear, crackled in Thorn's helmet. Calm, it was female, imbued with an authority that needed no rank. Ares 1, this is Valkyrie. I'm on station. Talk to me. Thorn scrambled to his knees, peering into the swirling ash. He could see nothing. Valkyrie? Who the hell is Valkyrie? Olympus told U.S. air support was a negative. Command's assessment was incomplete, the voice replied, with no hint of irony. I'm flying blind in this soup, so I need you to be my eyes. Designate your next priority target. The shock wore off, replaced by a surge of desperate hope. He grabbed his laser designator, his movements suddenly energized. Copy that, Valkyrie. We have a mortar position. Bearing 075 from my position. Approximate range 500 meters. There on the second terrace of the caldera. I don't have sensors for a laser lock, Ares 1. You'll have to talk me in. Use cardinal directions and describe the target. Thorn felt a chill. She was really flying blind. Understood. Target is due east of the wreckage of our extraction bird. You see the fire. A pause. Then, affirmative. I have a visual on the burn. From the fire, track north along the cliff face. It's a dug-in position, 3 tubes, sandbagged. Copy. The voice of Valkyrie replied. Engaging. Again, the monstrous shadow swept past, this time from a different direction. 2 missiles dropped from its wings, their rocket motors igniting with a brilliant white flash that cut through the gloom. They flew a flat, direct trajectory, slamming into the caldera terrace. A secondary explosion followed, a massive eruption of fire and black smoke as the mortar crew's ammunition cooked off. The ground shook. Another threat erased in an instant. In the Olympus TOC, Colonel Vance stared at the tactical display in stunned disbelief. A single, unauthorized icon, VKY-781, had appeared inside the red circle of death. It was moving with impossible speed and precision through an area his models had deemed unsurvivable. Get me a channel to that pilot, he roared. Lieutenant Chun was already on it. Major Rostova, this is Colonel Vance. You are in direct violation of a command order. Return to base immediately. The only reply was the sudden appearance of 2 new red icons winking out of existence on the map as Valkyrie completed another gun run. Then her voice, still perfectly level, came over the command channel, for all to hear. Negative, Colonel. I'm a little busy right now. The enemy was not stupid. They were hunters and they adapted quickly. The initial shock of the A-12's arrival gave way to a coordinated response. The lone, Angel of Death gun runs were over. The militia knew they couldn't hit what they couldn't see, so they started flushing the beast out of the shadows. Valkyrie, be advised. Thorn's voice was urgent over the comms. We're seeing multiple launches from hidden positions inside the canyon walls. They look like some kind of drone. Rostova's threat display, previously dark, suddenly blossomed with a dozen new contacts. They weren't conventional missiles. They were smaller, more agile hunter-killer drones, purpose-built for confined spaces. They swarmed out of concealed launch tubes, their small turbine engines screaming as they accelerated. I see them, she said, her voice betraying no alarm. The drones were fast, their movements erratic. They weren't trying to get a missile lock. They were trying to herd her. They fanned out, creating a deadly net, attempting to force her higher, up into the overlapping kill boxes of the remaining heavy AA cannons on the ridges above. In the Olympus TOC, the atmosphere had shifted from disbelief to high-tension drama. Every eye was glued to the main display, where Valkyrie's icon was now being swarmed by a school of piranha-like red triangles. Colonel Vance stood rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind racing. His entire operational doctrine was being dismantled before his eyes. The pilot he had written off as a reckless relic was single-handedly holding the line, but she was now hopelessly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. His training, his instinct, his ego, all screamed at him to reassert command, to pull her out. But another part of him, the buried deep part that still remembered being a young pilot with his back against the wall, was captivated. He was witnessing something impossible. His voice, when he spoke, was different. The hard edge of anger was gone, replaced by the clipped, focused tone of a tactician. Valkyrie, this is Vance. The drones are networked. They're sharing targeting data. You can't outrun them, and you can't fight them all at once. I'm aware of that, Colonel, Rostova replied. She banked the A-12 hard, the airframe groaning as she pulled 6GS, a drone streaking past where her cockpit had been a second before. A proximity alert shrieked in her ear. They're boxing you in, Vance continued, his eyes tracing the drone's flight paths on the map. He was no longer giving orders, he was analyzing, contributing. Their pattern is a classic contracting spiral. They're forcing you into the kill zone of the main battery at grid coordinate 4-7 Echo. The canyon to my west, Rostova stated, more to herself than to him. The map shows it as a box canyon. A dead end. That's correct, Major. Whatever you're thinking, don't do it. It's a trap. On the ground, Thorne and his men could only listen to the exchange, their own battle momentarily forgotten. They could hear the shriek of the drones echoing off the canyon walls, a sound like 1,000 angry hornets. They occasionally caught a glimpse of the A-12, a fleeting gray shape twisting through the ash, a drone in hot pursuit. Valkyrie, what are your intentions? Vance demanded, a note of genuine concern in his voice. Rostova's reply was calm, but threaded with an intensity that made the hair on Chen's arms stand up. Colonel, you said I couldn't outrun them, and I can't fight them all at once. A drone exploded off her port wing, a concussion rocking the cockpit. She didn't even flinch. So I'm going to make them come to me. All of them. With a decisive shove of the throttle, she banked the A-12 not away from the trap, but directly into it. She plunged the heavy aircraft into the mouth of the box canyon, the one place on the map from which there was no escape. The swarm of drones, their AI sensing a cornered target, immediately converged and followed her in. On the tactical display in the TOC, Valkyrie's icon flew straight into the dead end, and the school of red triangles swarmed in right behind her. Then, her icon vanished from the screen, lost in the sensor shadow of the deep canyon. The box canyon was a vertical tomb. The walls were sheer, closing in on the A-12 as Rostova flew deeper. The swirling ash was thicker here, the light almost completely gone. It was like flying down a throat. Behind her, the combined scream of a dozen drone engines grew louder, a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. They knew they had her. There was no way out. In the TOC, a collective gasp went through the room. We've lost her signal, Chen yelled. The canyon walls are blocking line of sight. Colonel Vance stared at the screen, his face pale. His logical mind saw only one outcome, a fiery crash at the end of the canyon. He had sent her to her death by trying to help. The arrogant pilot had finally flown one reckless maneuver too many. Inside the cockpit, Rostova was utterly calm. This was not a panic move. It was a calculated, insane gambit, a maneuver so far outside standard doctrine it didn't even have a name. She was watching the canyon wall rushing toward her on the low-light camera feed. Closer, closer. The drones were right on her tail, jockeying for position to deliver the killing blow. At what she judged to be the last possible second, she did something that defied aerodynamics. She chopped the throttles to idle, simultaneously deploying her massive air brakes. The A-12, designed for stability, decelerated with brutal, bone-jarring force. At the same time, she slammed her rudder hard left and fired the portside maneuvering thrusters, a system designed for small course corrections during a hover, not for high-speed flight. The aircraft, protesting with a scream of stressed metal, performed a physics-defying flat spin. The nose whipped around in a vicious, horizontal arc, the G-forces trying to tear the wings from the fuselage. For a terrifying moment, the A-12 was flying almost backwards, its tail leading the way down the canyon. The pursuing drones, locked onto her heat signature and programmed for a forward chase, were completely unprepared. They shot past her in a confused, angry swarm, unable to correct their momentum in the tight confines. Rostova's maneuver wasn't over. As the nose of her aircraft swung past the 180-degree mark, she retracted the air brakes, disengaged the thrusters, and slammed the throttles back to full military power. The A-12, its nose now pointing back toward the canyon entrance, surged forward with a roar. She had just performed an aerial J-turn inside a shoebox. The hunter had become the hunted. The entire drone swarm was now directly in front of her, trapped between her and the back wall of the canyon. They were caught in their own net. Now, she whispered to herself. Her thumb depressed the trigger on her flight stick. The Gu-18/B Gungnir cannon erupted. It wasn't a short burst. She held the trigger down, unleashing a solid, unbroken stream of 40mm high-explosive incendiary shells into the clustered drones. The narrow canyon acted as a containment vessel, turning the space into a blender of shrapnel, fire, and plasma. Drones vaporized, collided with each other, and slammed into the rock walls. In less than 3 seconds, the entire swarm was annihilated in a chained series of spectacular explosions. Rostova flew the A-12 directly through the fireball of her own making, emerging from the mouth of the box canyon like a demon from the gates of hell. The air behind her was clear of threats. Back in the TOC, her icon reappeared on the map. A moment later, all 12 red triangles vanished simultaneously. The room was utterly silent. No one had ever seen anything like it. Vance stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. He keyed his mic, his voice unsteady for the first time. Valkyrie, report status. Rostova's breathing was slightly heavier now, the first sign of the immense strain she was under. Threat neutralized, Colonel. Resuming close air support for Ares' team. A second extraction bird might be a good idea right about now. The destruction of the drone swarm broke the back of the militia's assault. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical one. The unkillable ghost in the ash had just slaughtered their high-tech trump card. The enemy's cohesive attack dissolved into a panicked, disorganized retreat. Rostova, now the undisputed queen of the basin, became a wrathful guardian. A second extraction, V-28 Valor, call sign Rescue 2, was dispatched from Olympus, this time with Colonel Vance's personal authorization and a direct, open channel to Valkyrie. Rescue 2 is inbound, ETA 5 minutes. Vance's voice came over the comm. Valkyrie, your new objective is to sanitize the landing zone. Keep their heads down. Do not let them get a shot off. Copy, Olympus, Rostova replied. Sanitizing LZ. For Ares' team, it was like watching a god of war at work. The A-12, a phantom no more, made its presence known. Rostova flew a wide, circular orbit around their position, a lethal perimeter of her own making. Any militia fighter foolish enough to break cover and take a shot was met with an immediate, terrifyingly precise response. A sniper team setting up on a high ledge was erased by a short, sharp burst from the Gungnir cannon. A technical, a rugged truck with a heavy weapon mounted on the back, tried to race toward the LZ. A single Maverick missile turned it into a burning wreck. She was everywhere at once, her movements a blur of controlled violence. She used her smoke canisters to lay down a thick screen of white smoke, obscuring the SEAL's position and creating a clear, protected path to the designated landing zone, a relatively flat expanse near the downed first bird. Thorne guided his team, carrying their wounded, toward the smoke. The ground was littered with the retreating enemy, but they were running away from the LZ, not toward it. They wanted no part of the invisible monster in the sky. The thumping beat of the Rescue 2's rotors grew louder, and soon the tilt rotor descended through the ash and smoke, its landing ramp already down. As the last of his men scrambled aboard, Thorne paused at the ramp and looked up into the swirling gray sky. He caught a fleeting glimpse of the A-12 as it banked, its broad, angular wings and powerful engines a silhouette of salvation. It was scarred, soot-stained, and magnificent. Ares' team is aboard. All personnel accounted for. He yelled into his comm. We are lifting off. As Rescue 2 rose into the air, Rostova fell in beside it, flying a loose escort formation. She would shepherd them out of the basin, a silent, gray wolf guarding the flock. Thorne stood on the open ramp, holding on to a safety strap, the wind whipping at him. He watched the A-12 hold its position, a shield between his team and the hell they were leaving behind. He could see the faint glow of the cockpit lights, and inside, the solitary, focused figure of the pilot. He keyed his private channel to the pilot. "Valkyrie, I don't know who you are, but you just saved my entire team. When we get back, the first drink is on me." A moment of silence, and then her voice, for the first time tinged with something other than pure, detached professionalism. A hint of weary warmth. "I'll hold you to that, Ares 1. Now get your people home." The A-12 banked away, peeling off to make one last, defiant pass over the basin before turning for home. Thorn watched until it was swallowed by the ash, a legend disappearing back into the myth from which it came. The silence in the Olympus TOC was profound. Every controller, every officer, had watched the final act unfold, their own duties forgotten. They had witnessed a masterclass in aerial combat, a clinic on how one pilot's will could override insurmountable odds. The green icon for Rescue 2, shadowed by VKY 781, cleared the basin's ridge and was safely on its way home. Lieutenant Chun let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He felt a grin spread across his face, one of pure relief and admiration. He looked over at Colonel Vance. The colonel stood motionless, his gaze still fixed on the holographic map where the battle had taken place. The chaotic sea of red icons had vanished, leaving only the calm, topographical blue. He seemed older, the rigid certainty in his posture replaced by a quiet, contemplative stillness. He had been proven wrong spectacularly and publicly. His by-the-book world had been shattered by a pilot he had dismissed as a reckless anachronism. Slowly, he reached for his comms panel. The entire room leaned in, expecting a reprimand, an order for Rostova to report for court-martial, a final assertion of his authority. He keyed the general channel to the base. His voice was clear, measured, and stripped of all previous arrogance. It was the voice of a man who had seen something that had fundamentally changed him. "Tower, this is Colonel Vance. I want a clear path for Major Rostova, call sign Valkyrie. When she lands, I want her ground crew to give her aircraft priority service. All of it," he paused, his eyes finding Chen's across the room. "And get a medical team to Hangar 7. Have them stand by for the pilot." He then switched to the encrypted command channel, speaking directly to the lone icon flying back through the twilight. "Valkyrie, Colonel Vance. Ares' team is clear. Your actions today, your actions were in violation of a direct order." Another pause, heavy with unspoken meaning. "They were also the finest damn flying I have ever witnessed. Return to base, Major." That's an order. It was the highest praise he was capable of giving. It was an admission, a concession, and an apology, all wrapped in the formality of a command. On the ground, as Rescue 2 touched down and the wounded were rushed to the medbay, Lieutenant Commander Thorne met the base commander on the tarmac. "The official report will state that Ares' team was extracted thanks to an unauthorized but decisive intervention by Major Eva Rostova," Thorne said, his voice raw with exhaustion but firm with conviction. "Anything else is a lie. She saved us. All of us." The legend of Valkyrie was no longer a whisper among maintenance crews. It was now cemented in the official record, spoken with awe in the command center, and toasted with heartfelt gratitude in the SEALs barracks. The institution, in the form of Colonel Vance, had been forced to reverse its judgment, not by argument or appeal, but by the undeniable truth of action. The pilot who spoke little had said everything with a single, perfectly executed flight. The A-12 Bad Penny touched down on the main runway with the gentle grace of a bird of prey returning to its nest. It rolled down the tarmac, its engines spooling down from a roar to a tired whine. The aircraft that taxied into the spotlights of Hangar 7 was not the same one that had left. It was covered in a film of dark gray ash, streaked with grime and scored by the abrasive particles of the basin. A long, fresh gash ran along the starboard engine nacelle, where a drone's wreckage had struck it. Small dents and pits peppered the leading edges of the wings. The aircraft looked exhausted, a warrior returning from a brutal, victorious brawl. It ticked and groaned as its superheated metal components began to contract in the cool hangar air, the sounds like the weary sighs of a living creature. The ground crew, led by Master Sergeant Rico, surrounded the jet, their movements quiet and respectful. They didn't see a machine. They saw their pilot's partner, the other half of a legendary whole. They began their post-flight checks with a reverence usually reserved for a shrine. The canopy hissed open, breaking the spell. A moment later, Major Eva Rostova swung herself over the side of the cockpit and climbed down the ladder. When her boots touched the concrete floor, she stood for a moment, leaning against the landing gear, the sheer physical and mental toll of the flight finally hitting her. She pulled off her helmet. Her face was pale, lined with exhaustion, and smudged with sweat and soot. Her short-cut dark hair was plastered to her forehead. But her eyes, as she looked at her scarred and battered aircraft, were clear and alive with a quiet, fierce pride. Rico approached her, holding a bottle of water. "Hell of a flight, Major." She took the bottle, her hand shaking slightly as she unscrewed the cap. "She held together," Rostova said, her voice raspy. It was the highest compliment she could pay the machine. She ran a gloved hand over the A-12's wounded nacelle, a gesture of thanks. She didn't look for praise or acknowledgement. She didn't need to. It was there in the eyes of every member of her ground crew. It was in the respectful silence of the hangar. It was in the approaching footsteps of Colonel Vance, who had left the TOC and walked all the way to the hangar to meet her, an unprecedented gesture. Vance stopped a few feet away. He looked from the pilot to the aircraft, taking in the evidence of the battle she had won. He saw the patched-up scar on the nose, the one Rostova always touched before a flight, and then the fresh wounds laid over it. He finally understood. It wasn't about insubordination. It was about a covenant between a pilot and her machine, a promise to the soldiers on the ground. He didn't offer a salute or a handshake. He simply met her gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Major Rostova," he said, his voice quiet, formal, but filled with an unmistakable, hard-won respect. "Well done." Eva Rostova simply nodded back. No words were necessary. She turned and walked away, leaving the colonel, her crew, and her legendary aircraft cooling in the silence. The quiet clicks and pings of the bad penny were the only applause she would ever need.